Hey, there it goes. All right, good morning, everyone. This is Mike Dane with MLS Technology. Today we're going to be doing the Using RPR webinar. This is a 2-hour-long class. Just as a heads up, we are going to be doing a couple things during the course to make sure that everybody's still present, paying attention. But before we get started with the actual course content and some of the other elements, and Randy, it appears that you actually have 2 sessions of the webinar open. That's why it's doing an echo. So you can close one and it should be fine. But all of you guys are going to be starting on mute by default. And I wanted to point out that there is a Q&A button down at the very bottom of the screen. If you guys are having any questions that you would like to ask, make sure that you post those into the Q&A section. Just as a heads up, the Q&A section is actually going to give me a little bit more of a notice that there's actually been a question asked. The chat section, on the other hand, unfortunately does not. So if you guys have something that's a little bit more pressing or something that just needs to be answered anytime in the near future, you can post those into Q&A, but if you post them into the chat, I might not notice those as quickly. I wanted to also mention that the session will be recorded. We'll be having a link sent off after the class has ended. And I also wanted to mention as well that if you guys have any audio or video issues, please let me know immediately. So if there's any problems at all, get in contact with us. Let us know either the Q&A, the chat, the raise hand button, or worst case scenario, you guys get disconnected, give us a call over at the service desk and we can help guide you back in. Now the CE credit will be provided over to our new education director, Jessica, pretty much right after class is over. But if you guys don't end up seeing that credit sent within the next couple days, just be patient. It should be on there by next Tuesday at the absolute latest. All right. Now, as far as the buttons go, again, there's the Q&A and chat buttons down at the bottom where you guys can type some text in there. Again, any questions should make sure to get funneled into the Q&A, and all of the commentary you guys would like to add should go into chat. There's also an alternative option. If you guys do end up wanting to use your voice to ask your question, you can hit that raise hand button down at the bottom. We're also going to be using this raise hand button to effectively just poll to make sure that everybody's actually still present. If you guys are joining us on a mobile device, the options are going to be a little bit different. You'll need to tap the screen in order for the buttons to appear down at the bottom. Raise hand is in a little bit different position, but otherwise they all serve the exact same function. Raise hand is just going to be a little bit more important since, I don't know about you guys, but typing out on the tiny little screens all day kind of gets a little tiresome. So chat and Q&A are still available, but hit that raise hand button if you'd like to get unmuted. All right. So we're going to go ahead and get the poll launched. This is a required element in order for you guys to be able to get the CE credit. So I need everyone to respond to this. Excellent. Yeah, thankfully it's pretty simple poll. Just are you new to real estate, and have you guys already used RPR before? I'll give it another about 30 to 45 seconds. Looks like there's still one person that needs to respond, but no rush, take your time. There we go. All right, we're going to be closing up the poll in just a few seconds here. I see that we still have one person that hasn't responded. Just as a reminder, this is actually required in order for you guys to get this CE credit. If you do not respond to the poll, or if you're having trouble responding to the poll, please let us know, but otherwise we won't be able to give you the CE credit. Okay, excellent. I appreciate it. Thank you. All right, so what it looks like at this point is that we do have a decent amount of you guys that are new to real estate, but the majority of you guys are not new. That's good news. If anything, we'll still try to provide plenty of context on why we do what we do while we're going through this class. So for those of you guys who are new, we'll still make sure that you guys have some at least context for things. For those of you guys who have used RPR before, hopefully I can give you guys some extra information. For those of you who have not, welcome. This is going to be a very useful tool. All right. So again, this is a 2-hour long class. We're going to be trying to take a break at the top of the hour. So let's actually get started with what RPR is. Now, RPR is actually a tool that's been provided by the National Association of Realtors. What that means is that we actually have this tool available to us no matter where we are in the country. If you guys are in a different MLS or even in a different state, you'll still have access to information in that state and within that MLS's details about the listings that are available in the area, et cetera. Now, RPR is actually a wholly owned subsidiary corporation of the National Association of Realtors. So we want to make sure that that's kind of out the gate. I know that there's been a lot of acquisitions going on by some very aggressive large corporations that are trying to buy up a lot of the competitors to products that we use frequently. RPR will never be bought up. This is something that's been developed and is owned by the National Association. This isn't going anywhere, and you guys don't have to worry about your information getting sold from it or it being bought out from under you guys or whatever. It's here to stay. I also wanted to point out that part of the reason why they even invented this whole system to begin with was because they wanted to make sure that you as realtors would actually be the lightning rod for any questions that a client might have. So rather than them going to another website to try and find out about listings that are active in the system or find out details about a property that they might be wanting to sell, all of that information can be found in here. And in fact, just as I mentioned before, since this is actually a national tool, you will have access to listings throughout the entire country. There's over 160 million US properties that are indicated in this system. And there's over 350 sources of information that have been aggregated into the reports that we're going to be creating, as well as even just looking up the property data. Now, I wanted to also point out with Matrix, when you guys are actually finding listings and getting those sent off to clients, it's worth pointing out that when you send things off, they have effectively another website that they go to in order to view the details that have been provided to them. So if you send something off to a client in Matrix, there's this one home page, they can get their own account, they can do their own searches, et cetera, et cetera. RPR is not a system that allows any customer front end. So the information that we're going to be seeing in here is for your own edification. There are reports that you guys can create, and those obviously can be sent out to the public without issue. But I wanted to point out that this entire system that we're going to be going through today does not have a consumer front end. It is exclusively for realtors. Again, the intention behind all of this was to make sure that you guys are the ones that have all of the information at your fingertips so that the clients are going to you whenever they have questions. Now, they also want us to mention that this is something that gets changed very frequently, not in radical ways. They actually did their final visual refresh for, at least from what I understand, a very long time, a couple of years ago. So this is going to be the layout, the tool set that you guys have for a while, but they do often end up adding new features and functions. Like we ended up having this prospecting portion that was added, as well as the opportunity zones, investor analysis. All of these options actually have been added since I started 4 years ago. So we've had a huge amount of new features and useful functionality that's been added. And again, without adding much more than just an extra button here or there. So you're not having to worry about having to relearn where everything is located. Just occasionally you'll find a new button somewhere that does something very useful. Finally, I did want to mention, just because oftentimes when we discuss RPR, and especially when RPR initially came out, a lot of people were worried that RPR was actually going to try and become a national MLS. Not to worry, that is not their intention. That's not what they plan to do with the system. This is just an endpoint for all of the data coming from MLSs. So whenever you end up having a situation where you've got a client that needs something done or uh, something like that, you're going to find the information that's already been provided within an MLS, not something that has been entered directly into RPR. They don't do any listing syndication or redistribution. Again, this is effectively an endpoint for all the information that's been provided by MLSs and tax assessors and all of the different sources of information like the school reviews. There's tons of stuff. Again, we'll get to a lot of that a little bit later. Now, the primary thing that we wanted to address today was two different scenarios. So first and foremost, we wanted to address what this is going to be like for those of you working with a buyer. That'll be our first half of our class. And then in the second half of the class, we're going to be talking about the perspective of working with a seller. So how to find the properties whenever they're not listed quite yet, seeing what we can do to get the pricing set properly, all sorts of extra stuff. All right, so let's actually start off with just a little brief overview of our homepage, and then we're actually going to dive into getting our settings and profile. That way we can actually make use of all of these functions. And then also once we start sending out our reports, everything looks fine, and you've got your contact information on there so people can reach back out to you. So starting up at the top, you should have a company logo, or if you guys don't have a company logo quite yet, you should notice our logo up at the top. And then there's going to be the basic menu that you have up here. Our homepage is always going to be found here on the homepage, but there's going to be some specific search functions that you can find along the way under this research option, including there's a little how to research button down here that gives us a little guide on how to actually use this tool. Similarly, marketing is going to have the same thing, as well as reports. And then there's also a learning section. This Learn tab is actually going to allow us to see information based on whatever page you happen to be on. Now, the reason I wanted to kind of lead with this is that when we're going through the system and clicking on certain things and finding ourselves under tabs of information for a specific property or for a specific neighborhood, if you guys ever get to the point where you're like, I don't know necessarily where I am, but I might be able to get something out of this, click on this Learn button. It's going to have some video tutorials on pretty much every page in the entire system, as well as a whole bunch of guides, tutorials, webinars, even some top questions on how to actually use whatever the page is that you happen to land on. So keep track of this Learn option. Worst case scenario, if you guys are exploring the system and you find that whatever this tool is isn't answering your question, there's a help button up at the top here where you guys can type in a question. You can get in contact with someone, and notice this is 24/7. They are always available. There's even a live chat option, a training area where all of these learning resources are actually coming from. And then there's also an email address, which I used to use. I used the phone line for a while. This live chat option is honestly the best thing. But we have had, thankfully very rarely, but we have had some issues where there might be some bad data in RPR. More often than not, it's going to boil down to some misfire from the MLS or some bad data coming from the assessor's offices. But the vast majority of the time, everything is working perfectly fine. I think I've probably gotten a total of like maybe 4 or 5 phone calls the entire time I've worked here about bad data in RPR. Again, I've been here for 4 years, which is a pretty stellar track record by comparison to some of the bad data that we might see in third-party systems that are outside of the MLSs. But finally, we do have a My Work section. This is where we're going to see some of the things that are actually going to be mirrored on our homepage. So let's actually talk about the homepage here. We've got a toggle between searching for residential or commercial. So no matter what you guys happen to sell, you will be able to find the content or the content that you're looking for. Assessors records for business properties, for residential properties, vacant land, all of that information can be found in here. You've got a search function that's going to be based on location. You can even put in tax IDs or parcel numbers. You can search by stuff that's for sale, for lease, or just things that are off the market that are just public records. There's all sorts of property types that we can look for. And if we switch over to commercial instead, all of those will change as well. And then we also have some extra filters. We're going to be talking about the search functions, but it's notable that this actually may change depending on how far zoomed in you are or how small your screen is. So since we had this actually come up yesterday when I was teaching the class, I wanted to just point this out. Notice as soon as I start zooming in, it drops off a couple of the options. And if I zoom in further, it's going to continue to drop off some of those options, all of which will be found under this More Filters button. So no matter how narrow or how wide your screen is, you can actually see all of those options available to you. I also wanted to point out, when you guys are on your home page, there's going to be a couple shortcuts up here at the top. We've got prospecting, using a map to search, creating reports if you guys just wanted to dive directly into making a report. There's an investor analysis and opportunity zone option. The prospecting, investor analysis, and opportunity zones we don't cover in class, but there are some very useful videos under the knowledge base that they have. Or if you guys get into one of these, you can use that learn button as well. We're actually going to be creating a CMA a little bit earlier. And if any of this stuff kind of goes over your head or you guys want to revisit this later, there is a tour homepage button as well. Now, one of the things that we're going to be covering when we get up to our settings is going to be this My Markets section. The way I like to describe this is for you guys that have actually been in Matrix for a while and have seen the hot sheets and the Market Watch section. This is effectively a combination of the two with a map built in. Instead of it actually being pared down to the way that Matrix has it, where it's just got a couple basic options and then you have to manually create a whole separate section that's going to be for specific things, or the Market Watch section, which is kind of just showing the numbers. This one's actually going to show us the numbers over here on the left for whatever specific areas we set up. And then over to the right, we actually get to see a map of where all of those properties are located. And we can just switch between all of those just by clicking on the different options over here on the left. Then if I want to switch to a different area, so for instance, if I wanted to check out what's happening in Ada, click on Ada, I can zoom in, I can see all the properties that are currently for sale, select them, and go learn more about them. But we're going to talk about how to customize this a little bit more later, but I really like the way that this is laid out. This is probably one of the things that I like the most about this because I can just dive in, find out what's happening in my stomping grounds, see if there's any new listings that have popped up, and find out if any of my buyers might be interested. Now, a little further down, we have the My Listings, My Properties broken down by saved, recent, reports, notes, and then the searches. Again, all of this is actually mirrored up at the top with this My Work. So we have the My Markets, which is right above, My Listings, My Saved Properties, Recent Properties, Reports, and Notes, all right here, and then Saved Searches and Recent Searches. There is, again, that little video down here that says Intro to My Work, so that if you guys are messing with something else and you just needed a reminder on what this is showing, you can check that there. Now, the My Listings sections is going to be pretty basic. This is literally just showing what listings you currently have available or listings that you had previously had. The My Properties section is going to show any of the properties that we've saved. So just as a heads up, if you guys find something that you're interested in, there is a little save button up here at the top right. You just click that little save icon, and you can always go back to access that either from the My Work section or from this saved section here. It's worth pointing out, you can even give specific names to the locations that you guys save. And if you guys needed to save that with a different name, you can always change that later. But we're going to see a little bit more about that once we've started looking for properties. We also have the recent properties that we viewed. So for instance, I just clicked on that one that said Sean and Chris. And in this case, here we have Sean and Chris up here at the top because that's the last listing that I happened to look at. So as you guys are going through and finding properties in the system, it's going to keep track of which ones you click on. This is especially handy for those of you guys who might be working on something, you get a call from a client, you get distracted a little bit later, you come back to your computer and you're like, wait a second, what was the address that we were just talking about? Well, you can always come back in RPR and see each and every property that you've clicked on. It's also worth noting on the recent, where we see the little monitor icon here, as well as on this recent searches, It's actually going to show us a little icon indicating whether you viewed this on the computer. That's what this little monitor is indicating. And other times, if you guys are looking for things on your phone, it's actually just going to show a little phone icon. It's a terrible segue into this, but just as a heads up, there is actually an RPR app. I can't stress enough how useful that app can be. It's kind of rare for me to not have a bunch of properties that I've looked up in whatever neighborhood I happen to be walking through. My wife and I go on walks every day, usually. If it weren't for the rain this week, I would have a bunch of properties that I just casually looked up whenever we're out on our walk because there's some pretty home and I want to know when it was built or why it was priced that way, et cetera, et cetera. So there's usually a whole bunch of properties on here that I've looked up on my phone, but that app is fantastic. I really think that that should just be a requirement for everybody. So if you guys don't have RPR on your phone yet, strongly recommended. All right, finally, we also have our reports and notes sections. Reports are going to be generated on each of the properties when you guys have requested one. They come in a variety of different options. We've got a property report, we've got seller's proceeds forms, we've got seller's reports, we've got valuation information, we've got the one-off single sheet flyers. I mean, there's just tons of stuff. We're going to be talking about the reports extensively a little bit later, though. So finally, we also have our notes section. Just as a heads up, each and every property that you guys find has its own, effectively, a notepad where you can add in any details. We're going to be looking at that extensively once we get to the seller's side of things. Because buyers, they might give you a little heads up on maybe what they like about a specific property, stuff like that. When it comes down to it, your sellers are where you're going to be posting the most of your notes, because oftentimes they're going to be requiring a lot of extra details that you're going to have to keep track of. So that's it for our homepage. Down at the very bottom, they do have a couple extra buttons, some things that are actually already present up here at the top. Let's now quickly jump to our profile, make sure that everything is up to date there. So whether you guys are following along right now, or if you guys are watching the video afterwards in the recording, head up to the top right and then click on Profile. On the Profile section, make sure that you guys have the same headshot that you use everywhere else. Just as a reminder on branding specifically, branding is something that I think a lot of people underutilize. If you have the exact same image on your Facebook as you do on your company website, as you do on any of the reports that you send off or in Matrix, et cetera, that's going to make it far more likely that people are actually going to remember who you are and remember what you do. So the more often you guys have the exact same photo appearing, the more likely people are to remember you, which of course in turn creates more business. This is just kind of a fundamental thing. I studied marketing in college, and that was kind of a big deal for them, was always make sure that you've always got the same headshot or the same logos appearing everywhere that they can appear. A little further down, we've got our contact information. Make sure that all of your contact information is up to date. Again, consistency is one of the biggest things that they need in branding, so always make sure that you guys have the right information in there. Up-to-date information, I should say. You can add in additional options for phone numbers, for fax numbers, add in any additional email addresses or website addresses. Just make sure that all of that information, again, is up to date. Make sure that it's all up to date, even if your technology is not. Here's a fax option and a pager option. I don't know anybody that uses pagers anymore, but if you still live in 1999, I guess you can have one. We also have another section down here for MLS or CIE info. Just as a reminder, if you do have a separate MLS, you guys can actually get this connected in there. We actually have a lot of people that have already used RPR but didn't realize that they could actually connect any of their other MLSs in here. Part of the reason why it might be beneficial to actually include that extra MLS that you guys are a part of, or extra association that you're a part of, is down here at the bottom, listing data access. So currently there are 4 MLSs in Oklahoma that are actually sharing their listing data, and this is going to show the stuff that's currently on the market. MLS technology has also decided to include the things that are off market. We also happen to be the largest MLS by how many counties we cover. But this little collection here is actually a pretty substantial portion of all of the areas in Oklahoma. Since there's only 77 counties, you guys can see that there's a lot of counties represented here and maybe a little bit of overlap. But I'm going to switch us over now to the all MLSs. There's an additional 4 residential MLSs in this state that are not sharing information. So if any of you guys have any say in the North Central board, Northeast board, which is actually our closest connection, besides Stillwater, of course, Northwest, and then of course the Stillwater board. If you guys have any say in those areas, I can't stress this enough, not sharing the data is actually hurting the business in the long run, even if it seems like it might be beneficial in the short term. I would stress that this is something that's valuable as well, because if you guys at least have the information available in RPR, you can pull up more information about the properties, more details about them, find more buyers for the people. It's just really beneficial. But we'll leave that where it is. If you guys do end up adding those extra MLSs, just as a reminder, you're going to have a little toggle button to switch between them. So that if you guys are working in Oklahoma City and then go back to Tulsa for a little while, you guys can switch between those whenever you're producing your reports. The license information needs to be added on there down at the bottom. More likely than not, it's already been added. But in my case, since I legally can't have a license, I don't have one here. And then finally, we get to the assistant users section. Just as a heads up, we mentioned earlier that the RPR system is not meant to be accessed by the public. Assistant users are the only exception to that. Again, if you are a licensed realtor, you'll automatically have access to RPR. If you are not, though, you would only have access as an assistant. Now, this means that you guys should only be adding people that are actually genuinely assistants. This is not a system that's meant for public consumption. There is a lot of proprietary information that's been put out there and a lot of confidential information that's been put out there. And having the public have access to that could be a real breach of not only the security of the system, but also the trust of the public, because that information was not meant to be viewed by other people. So if you do have an assistant, though, it's very easy to set up. I've already got an assistant put in on my system. I can get rid of them by just clicking a button. So if you guys do end up getting rid of an assistant or they're no longer working for you, just get rid of that and they'll lose their access to the system. All right. Up here at the top, we do have some further information on here where we can get signed in with our email address, make sure that our password is up to date, and double check which apps are actually installed on which devices. So I've got one on my work phone, my iPad, my home phone, and I can get rid of those if need be. So if I no longer have access to this device, just delete it and we're good to go. All right. Now make sure that you save any changes if you guys haven't. And then let's head over to the settings. This is actually going to be tied to a couple different things. On the left-hand side here, we actually have our listing settings. This is going to show us the little labels on the map. So whenever we were looking at the map, it actually showed us which properties had most recently been listed. And this is actually how we define what's going to be considered new. So for instance, if the market in your area is extremely slow, so things are staying on the market for a really long time, your definition of a new listing might be a little bit different than what we might consider new in Tulsa or in Oklahoma City or in Bartlesville, whatever. So make these adjustments based on your local market. So if you guys find that refresh that. If you guys find that you're seeing listings that have been on the market for a little bit too long being labeled as new, you can always turn this down. If you see listings that have been just added as far as you're concerned, but that was actually a week ago, you can always set this to have a longer time frame. Now, it's also going to allow you to adjust how many recent properties are going to show up if you're looking at anything that's sold or leased. Again, adjust this based on your market. So if you guys really have a hopping market, you're probably going to want to have these turned down a little bit. If you guys have some market that you're working in that's not particularly as busy, you guys can turn these up so that you see the new label for longer and you see a larger amount of listings showing up because we're seeing older listings that have sold. Now, this is all going to be for the residential side. There is a separate section here for commercial, but over here on the right is going to be the most important thing for the settings. Changing this stuff is kind of all relative. Setting up the My Markets section, on the other hand, is something that everybody should be doing. Now, the My Markets is actually going to appear on the home page. If you guys remember earlier, we had that My Markets section where it shows a little list over here on the left-hand side, and then we've got a map over here on the right. Again, this is broken down by which properties are going to be available in those areas. So set this up to be effectively your stomping grounds. Now, my current setup that I have here is actually all of the different places that we go to do training. We are actually planning on getting back out there and doing outreach training. In fact, actually, towards the end of June, we're going to be out in Durant. We're hoping to get back out there to Ardmore and Ada, probably Bartlesville again, and I think not McAllister and Muskogee. I think we're actually going to be going back to Eufaula just because it's a little bit closer to everybody there, and there's a nice venue. But if you guys do end up wanting to set this up to be just general cities like I have it set up, that's fine. But you also do have the option to set up specific zip codes. So there we go. We can just choose that zip code, or we can even go down into specific neighborhoods. So like, for example, we had yesterday somebody in our class that was working in Patrick Henry. So we just type in the neighborhood. It's going to offer us all the different locations, and I can just click on that one. And this will actually be the neighborhood itself for Tulsa. So just the Patrick Henry neighborhood, or if I wanted to do Pearl District in Tulsa, that kind of stuff. So you can get really specific, or you guys can be really vague. It's all going to depend on how you want to have that set up. But once you guys are done, make sure to save your changes, and we'll head back to our homepage. Now, the beginning of class, we're going to be focused a little bit more on working with the buyers. So this will kind of be our little general discussion on how RPR works. The first thing we need to talk about is the search function up here at the top. So the search function at the top does have a location search. This is where we can put in a specific address if we wanted to. So if I had a very specific property that I wanted to look up, we can just type in the address and go directly into the property's information. If instead I needed to actually search for a specific area and find all of the properties that are available in that area, what I usually recommend people to do is to set all of your filters first. So for instance, I want to make sure that I see only the stuff that's for sale, only the stuff that's currently active. I only want to see the things that are single family, or I can open it up for anything else. I'm going to set mine to single family. We're going to put in a price. The price in this case actually allows us to just choose from one of these quick options. So if I wanted to do 2,000 or 200,000 to 300,000, easy. If I actually wanted to type in a specific number, so let's say 275, go. And then I also wanted it to be 325. There we go. We can put it in that way. Or if you guys noticed, while we were typing things out, so like if I start typing 150, it's going to check to see if I want one of these options. So this dropdown will always be contextual. I think this is fantastic. There's another system that we used to have access to. It was the Realtor.com professional search. And it only allowed you guys to choose from a pre-selected list of price ranges. So if you had somebody that had, again, 275 to 325 as their price range, you kind of just had to settle for 250 to 350. And then you end up with a whole bunch of extra results that you have to filter out. And you have to do that manually. It was just a pain. So I really like the way they have this set up. Also wanted to point out something interesting about this. They don't just have the total price. You can also break this down to see that ratio between the price and square feet. You can also do the lot size, either broken down by square feet or acres. So again, if you guys have somebody that's looking for, let's say, a lot or farm and ranch, you guys can actually break that pricing down so that you can get the ratio of the price of the property versus the square footage or the acreage. So really nice to have those options. We also have an option to set up the beds and baths. I wanted to point something interesting out here. If you guys only set one, it's going to automatically just assume that you're doing 3 or more. Because if you don't fill in the max, it's just not going to assume that there is one. Same thing goes with our bathroom count. There we go. And if I do end up having, at least set a price in here. If I do end up having more filters that I want to use, there's always this more filters option to the right, which gives us the exact same options that we saw before. And just as a reminder, this is because you guys might notice that as we zoom in, or if we have a narrow screen, we're going to lose some of those options. But when we do click that more filters button, it gives us all of those options that we saw before. It's even going to include some extra options for, in this case, the price, where we can see the estimated value of the property versus the price that it's listed at, and we can find out what ratio we want for that. So if we're looking for a good deal, or if we're trying to find properties that are maybe a little bit overestimated or overpriced on the estimate versus the listing itself. We've also got size options that are beyond what we had up here at the top. We've got a living area, lot size, both by square feet or acres. You can choose whether or not you want any foreclosed properties, find out what the land use is, especially important for those of you guys working with vacant land. And then finally, we also have some miscellaneous fields where we can search for a specific person. This could be especially handy for those of you guys working with a new seller. So remember, this option is there. We're not going to be going back to circle around this issue, but if you do end up having somebody that has a property and you don't remember what the address was, or they never gave it to you, you can always search for it from here. There's also year built options, how long people have owned their property. This could be helpful for those of you guys looking for prospecting options. And then finally, the keyword search. I think the keyword search is actually one of the cooler features on the search function, primarily just because this isn't just going to be searching for a keyword. In this case, we don't have an option to find out what the size of the garage is. But that's a piece of information that's actually added to our listings. In fact, that's actually a required field, is to put in how many cars can fit in the garage, what kind of garage it is. If there is no garage, you don't have to mention it, but that information is still going to be present in RPR. It's just that even though there isn't a sort option for it, where we have a filter that we can choose, you can use it as a keyword down here at the bottom to allow us to make sure that that information is included whenever it's filtering our results. Additionally, we have an option to just add in something like mature trees. So this is a feature on some MLSs where they'll actually be asking whether there's mature trees on the property, maybe even a binary like yes or no, or it could just be a casual mention of this in the public remarks. So the keyword search isn't just restricted to the data that's been entered purely as just details about the property, but it'll also be searching for any of the details that have been added into the public remarks or the broker remarks. So it's effectively just doing a keyword search for anything that comes with that data. Now, since I've added all of these filters on here, the last thing that I have to do is just choose where I'm going to be searching. So in my case, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to search out in Bixby. And when I type that out, you'll see that it offers me a bunch of specific locations. And I can just either select one of them from here, or I can continue to clarify to make sure that I've got exactly the right one, and either hit enter or click on the place option down below. What? Oh, it's because I put in the mature trees. I forgot about that. Let me remove that. There we go. Okay. And just as a heads up, as soon as I hit that remove option, you'll notice up here at the top that just like with Matrix, where it automatically shows how many results that you have, this changed to the number 5. I hit update and search, and now I've got my 5 properties. Oh, including a coming soon listing. All right, now that we're actually looking at some of the search results, I wanted to address a couple of the things here. Whenever we're looking at these search results, it's worth pointing out that we actually have a little icon over here to the left that has just the primary photo for the property. And over to the right, there's that little saved icon. So if a client ends up mentioning, hey, you know what, this one actually looks really cool, but obviously we can't do any offers or showings on it quite yet, I want you to save that for me for later. I can hit this little save icon. We can add in Billy's new favorite house. There we go. Save it, and I can come back to that later. I can also just make changes to this if I need to. Name is required. So that I know who it was that was talking about this, or maybe what the point of interest was in this property. Again, all of that information will be under the My Work section where I can see the My Saved Properties, and that's also again on the home page as well. So you can always get back to those. Additionally, when you guys are looking at this list, you can select these and start printing those off if need be. There's also going to be a button up here at the top where we can switch over instead from this little list view. We can switch over instead to a photo grid view. I kind of prefer the photo grid view. It doesn't show quite as much information about the property itself. So like the details here are pared down to just a couple fewer options, but it also is going to include the option to scroll between the photos, which I am very fond of. Additionally, when you guys are looking at the listings, whether you guys are looking at it on the list, you can just click on the photo here, or you can click on the photo here, and that'll actually open the listings details. So when you click on the listings details, we're going to end up having some extra options in here. But if I needed to get back to this, like maybe I'm looking at this now and I'm seeing, wait, this might not be mapped in the right spot, or this might not be where my client is interested. Up here at the top is going to be the breadcrumb trail of where we've gone. So maybe I've gone a little too far at this point. We need to move back a step. There's a button right here for search results. So again, remember this breadcrumb trail is going to be effectively showing us where we got to, or how we got to this particular spot. So go back to my search results. And let's now talk about the final option for looking at their search results. Again, we've got their list, the photo grid view like this, and then finally we have the map view. Now the map view honestly is better here than it is in almost every other search function that we have, matrix, realist, the rest of those. So what we're looking at here is actually going to be, in my specific search, the city limits for Bixby. So that's actually what these orange lines are indicating. It does show that there's a couple options that have shown up outside of Bixby, or at least Bixby proper, that still are Bixby addresses that just happen to not be within the Bixby city lines. Now, if I wanted to, I can actually expand this whole section out so that I can actually see all of the map filling my screen. I prefer looking at it this way just because you guys notice it does require me to kind of scroll up and down to be able to see all my options. If I switch over to the full screen view, the map fills the screen and my buttons are over here on the side. I did want to point out we have a couple different options for searching within an area. When you guys are doing a map search, there's going to be the option to use a custom shape that you guys have drawn in the past. Over on the right-hand side, we do have a draw option. So we're going to be talking about how to actually create a custom search area. And you can save that custom search area over here on the left under the saved areas. There's also the show geographies option. This is going to allow us to add some extra layers to the map. For those of you guys who have done map searches in Realist or Matrix, this is actually going to be pretty familiar already. For instance, if you guys wanted to see what the school district lines were, you guys can actually hit a button for that, school districts. And you can even choose to see a little bit more specific information, which I really like. If you wanted to see what the grade school lines were, you can also see what the minor or micro neighborhoods are called, as well as city lines. All that extra information can be added. Now, over here on the right-hand side, we do have the zoom in and out options. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. We can even move away from where we had initially searched. And oh, wait, no, I actually need to move back to where we were. I can click this little center icon to bring us back. There's a view option that allows us to switch between satellite, aerial, road, and terrain. The satellite imagery, just as a heads up, is going to be truly a satellite image. Now, that seems kind of ambiguous when I say it that way, but Watch what happens when we start zooming in. As soon as we get to a certain point, it's actually going to go a little wonky in some areas. So what that means is that we're actually seeing a tilted view of the imagery. Let me see if I can find that again. There's a whole bunch of it here in Oklahoma or in Tulsa. Oh yeah, here we go. So as soon as I start zooming in, you notice that everything kind of gets scrunched up. It's also pretty obviously at an angle. As soon as we zoom in close enough, we can actually see some of the fronts of these houses or some of the backs of these houses because it's not a perfectly top-down view. This is actual satellite imagery rather than being what you guys might be looking for, which is referred to as the aerial view. Before I switch over to the aerial view, I also wanted to point out to you guys that on the satellite imagery, we are not seeing any labels to the streets. Satellite imagery also allows us to switch, so we can actually see what the satellite imagery looks like from different angles. So again, this is only going to be available in certain areas where they've taken multiple different angles of photos. But the aerial view is most often what people are actually wanting. First of all, it's going to be a top-down view. So notice we no longer see any front doors, but we also get to see the street names. And also all of the parcels are now their true shape. So again, whenever we were looking at the satellite imagery, we could switch between the different angles, and that's going to end up skewing either north or south or east or west to make it narrower than the opposite directions. The road view is the one that I usually recommend people to use, primarily just because obviously this is going to be the most cut and dry view. It's going to try and highlight where the actual buildings are on there according to what Google has amassed. So just a heads up, that might not always be exactly correct. Like this particular property over here looks like it actually ends on the property line, which seems like it might be a little bit inconvenient. Meanwhile, when we actually switch this over to an aerial view, we can see that, oh, well, maybe Google was right. That looks like that comes up pretty much to the property line. Ooh, nice pool. So let's switch back over now to the terrain view. Hello, any terrain nearby? Oh, oop, we got some shading here. Well, I hate to say this, but as a native Coloradan, this is weak. Where are the mountains? Oh wait, there is a mountain supposedly up here. Ooh, look, it actually reaches a whole 800 feet above sea level. That's right. Let me know when you guys hit 5,000 above sea level. That's when you got something worthwhile. But the terrain view is kind of helpful. Again, if you end up switching over to terrain view and you don't see any shading on it, don't be concerned. That's just because you're in Oklahoma. All right, enough bad jokes. I'm going to switch back over to our road view. And let's actually hit that recenter button. Again, the recenter button or this little reticle icon will bring me back to where my search was originally located. So I can actually see the dots that I had initially added with my search. The draw tool will allow me to be a little bit more specific about where we're actually going to be searching. So again, as we searched for Bixby, it ended up providing me a couple options. One that was pretty far north up here. We've got one that appears to actually be in Leonard, and then a couple more that are actually pretty obviously in Bixby proper. If I do end up deciding that I wanted to narrow my search down by maybe some more obvious restraints, I can go over to this draw and then use either the freehand tool, which is going to allow me to just draw on the map. And you notice I can be pretty crazy about my shapes and then search within that area instead, or delete it or save it. We also have the option to do a radius, which allows me to just draw a specific sized radius around a certain area. And again, search in that area, save it as a certain area for future use, etc. Or what I usually recommend people to use is the polygon tool. So for instance, with the freehand tool, that's entirely dependent on how well I can move my hand around. And if I'm not particularly good at that, or if I'm not particularly good at moving a mouse to begin with, because I got a trackpad or a really bad mouse, or one of those mice that has the gigantic ball you have to use your thumb for, which just doesn't make sense to me. But I know a lot of people who are proficient at it. Instead, I'm going to use this polygon tool to make a perfectly exact shape. So the way that I want it to appear And notice it keeps nice hard angles. And that way I can just go back to the river, double click, and it finishes the shape off. So the easiest way for me to just kind of try and describe what this is actually doing, if you guys have ever seen those conspiracy theory movies, sure, you can just use the image in your mind of Mel Gibson getting all worried. Think about it this way. Whenever I'm looking at the pin board and I've got this little pin that I just added, I click and that drops a pin where I've got the piece of string that I'm going to be moving into a new position. Now I am not currently dragging. When I move my cursor around, it's just showing this faint orange line. As soon as I click again, it solidifies that line. And now I've got a new pin set up here where my faint line is actually protruding from. And when I click again, oops, again, click once more, and then now I'm actually going to follow the curve of the Arkansas River here. And then once I get back up to the street that I was interested in, I can either double click on where I'm effectively done with that shape, or I can click back to the original point. Now what this has done again is made a shape that's got the right angles that I was hoping for, and then also follows the curve. Now all of this was working way better than if I had tried to do this with my, I promise you I'm not actually, man, I just can't keep it as straight this way. I mean, I have a really decent mouse and it's still just not doing what I want. So you can try, it's sufficient. It'll try and smooth out some of those. So obviously it's not going to end up just leaving it a really ugly mess like I actually initially drew it. But if you guys do end up wanting to be a little bit more exact, I recommend the polygon tool. There's also a box tool as well. So if I just want to draw a shape on the map, boom, search in this area and I'm good to go. So here's the only two results that I have. Once I've got my results, I can just click on them, find the details that I need and go to the view full details. Or you guys can continue using other options on here. Points of interest, the schools, the data layers, most of these are going to be pretty obvious options like schools. If I wanted to find out what's the schools in the area, I can start adding those to the map. And you can see the dots where everything is. Click on those to find out what school it is. You can even run school reports or find market activity for that area. So the area that this particular central elementary actually serves. And notice anytime I click on these, it's actually showing me what the boundaries are for that particular school. In this case, I keep on clicking on public schools, so it's only showing me that. Do we have any private schools I can see? Oh, well, I'm only getting the public schools. Town and country, here we go. Hey, this is what I was hoping for. Here's a private school. Obviously, they don't have district lines the same way that others do. Anyway, schools are pretty obvious. The points of interest, even more obvious. If you guys want to know where banks and gas stations and fire departments or police stations are, this one would have saved me a lot of headaches when I moved into an apartment that I didn't realize that there was a fire station like pretty much on the other side of one of the buildings. So that kept me up at night frequently. That was annoying. Would have loved to have known that that was there. There's also going to be a driving option. This is the one that I think is the most useful. So what this is actually going to allow us to do is effectively say, all right, I want to know, let's say I work at ORU and I need to know how long it's going to take me to get to work every day. So I type in my address, I go to next, drops a pin on that central location, and then it's going to allow me to choose, all right, I'm traveling by car. I'm going to be trying to get someplace at 8 a.m. on a Monday, so we know the traffic's going to be garbage. And then we want to make sure that I don't end up having to travel any longer than 10 minutes. You can choose between these, but I hate commuting with a passion. I used to live in Oklahoma or in Tulsa and then had to commute to Bartlesville for a job, and it was miserable. So what I would actually have preferred to do is, let's say I don't want to spend any more time than 15 minutes on my commute. I do 15 minutes, hit next. And what this is actually going to do is spill out on the map how far away you can actually be and still get to that location within 15 minutes. Now you can also do this the other way around as well. So if you guys wanted to set up the location that the buyer wants to live and then find out how far they can get within 15 minutes, either way works. But what this is effectively showing me is if I live, all the way down here in southwestern Jinx, I can still hop on the highway, go up here, go over here, and get to ORU within 15 minutes. Now, if I end up living outside that area, it's going to end up changing how far or how long it's going to take me. And again, I can adjust this to find out how long it's going to be. If it's 20 minutes, for me, I mean, you guys can see it's relatively well-connected city. But if I wanted to not be any more than 10 minutes, even under the worst circumstances, I can set that up with a more narrow view. So I love this. I think this is a really useful tool, but not a lot of people know that it's even there. We also have another option that's just going to be a basic distance. This one's more just, really radius option, honestly. But there is also a traffic counts option. This one was especially important for my wife. When we were looking for a new place to live, she grew up in Stigler, and honestly, that place is so small that everything is just quiet 90% of the time. So at night, it was pretty easy to fall asleep because everything was really silent. We lived in a place for a while there that was right off of a thoroughfare, and the amount of noise from the nearby highway and thoroughfare was keeping us up at night. So this traffic count option will allow you guys to see effectively what the amount of noise could be in the particular area that you guys are working in. If you do end up deciding that, that might not be the best option, you guys can actually see that on the map and show that to your clients. But that's it for our map. I'm going to hop back out of that, zoom back into a property. Let's actually take a look at what the details are for this property, and then we'll go ahead and take our break. Now, when you first get into one of the listings, it's worth noting that there's going to be a few tabs up here at the top. The history and charts options are going to be a lot more number-based information, so we're going to skip over those for our class today. But I did want to address the refined value in CMA option when we get to the seller side of things. But there's also going to be an option to switch over to the neighborhood. We'll briefly view that in a bit here, but that's going to be starting us off at the top. So we've got an option to save and print or create a report, which we'll do in a bit here. But then it dives directly into the property's details underneath all of that. So we can see where the map is. We can actually click on this and find out all the information that we just did, as well as if we needed to, we can even add in some extra data layers like the flood zones, find out what the flood zones are in that area, make sure that it's not actually in a flood zone if need be. We also have the photos. You can scroll through those here. You can even put them into a full screen, turn on a slideshow if you wanted to, even go through and find specific thumbnails to look at, etc. Over on the right, we've got our listing information. This is going to show us who it was that listed it, what their email, phone number, website is, and even our broker remarks. Just a heads up as well, the broker remarks are things that were entered in the MLS. This is another reason why we do not want anybody in the public that's actually going to access RPR. Again, only assistants should have access beyond you, because again, this could include some pretty secure information. It's not meant to be viewed by anybody else. A little further down though, we do have on the left-hand side our property summary. This shows us not only the list price, but also any of the estimates for the price. And just so you guys are aware, there's two levels of the automated estimations that go on here. If you guys see something that says an AVM, that's the automated valuation model. If you see something that says RVM, this is actually the realtor valuation model. This is a proprietary algorithm that's produced this number, which means that it's going to be significantly more accurate than pretty much any other AVM that you guys have on the market available to you, most especially the Zillow's estimate, which is the analogy that most people really would understand if they came in without any understanding of what an AVM or RVM is before. But this number that it produced, which thankfully is not too far from what we actually have here, it actually has a confidence score that's connected to it, as well as a range. So you notice in this case, the range is actually really narrow. And we see that the confidence score that it has for the price that it's provided is also very high. So what this is indicating is that it has had a significant amount of information available to produce this number, and it's created a very narrow range for that particular property. Some extra details about the property here that are just basic information. We've also got a description that's put in here, which mentions the builder. You're not supposed to do that. It's a violation. It's okay. We also have a section here for the details about the property. So again, beyond just what was provided up here in the basic facts, breaks it down on a detail by detail basis, and also has a section over here to the right that has your changes. Now, the good news is when you guys are working with the seller, while you guys are talking to the seller, you can start documenting any of the changes that are different from either the tax record details. So for instance, this one happens to be in one of the counties that, for whatever dumb reason, doesn't include the bedroom count. We would need to document that if this was a seller and they had no longer, or they didn't have a listing for this property already. A little further down, we can add in some notes for the property, as well as over here on the right, you can add some notes. When you guys are on the app, beyond just adding in some text notes, there's also an option to do a voice recording. So you guys can actually just set up a recording, get all your information from the buyer or seller that they like about this property, and then transcribe it if you would like to later, or even just hit play and listen to it later. Further down, we have the schools. This is the last real notable thing on this property summary. There's a couple other things to mention, but this is something that's going to be based on either the listing or the location. So make sure that whenever you guys are looking at this, you guys are actually checking, okay, this is actually who the listing agent said is going to be the schools, and this is actually who the schools in the area are. That's it. That's the only thing that it's actually trying to point out here, is just that this is actually the schools nearby, and these are the schools that the agent has reported, which happens to notably be missing the Bixby Middle School. But anyway, there is a section here for what's called AARP Livability Index. There is, I mean, I might as well just mention this briefly, but there's a lot of areas in Oklahoma that have some details that are not particularly glowing reviews of, in this case, the affordability, and Bixby is kind of leaning a certain way, so that number has decreased. The healthcare in some areas of Tulsa is not great. Relatively clean air and water in this particular part of town, but if you go up to North Tulsa, you're going to end up having a completely opposite number. So very often, at least as far as I've noticed with all of my training on this, the stuff here in Oklahoma is a little bit below average. So this is an option that you guys can show to your client if you would like to. When we get to the report option, I'm going to show you guys how to turn this off, so that if it's not, beneficial information for the client to see, or it's not a glowing review of the property, we can just choose not to include it. If you guys are curious about any of the data that you guys are noticing on these systems, though, there's almost always going to be a about this data, especially when you get to the history, the charts, and the neighborhood. It's going to break down where this actually comes from, what the source is, and how often it's actually being updated. And if you needed to learn more, for instance, in this case, it's AARP that's coming up with this. They have a whole website that's devoted to explaining where they got these numbers and why they got these numbers, etc. The rest of the information on here is pretty generic, just basic details. It's available if you guys need it. There's even a plat map. So all of this information down here at the bottom is just coming over from either the listing or the public records. Over here on the right, there's some charts that are going to be showing us more details. All of that can actually be found again in the history and the charts section as well. And then there's a couple buttons up here at the top that are going to be just extra details that you guys can use if need be from third-party websites. If you guys don't like the number that they gave you, or if they gave you a number that just isn't particularly accurate at all, or just no number at all, there is a Valuate tool that you guys can use to analyze that property. And there's also another tool that they recently added called Climate Check. What Climate Check does is it checks what this particular zip code will have as far as future risks based on a 30-year mortgage. So in this case, this particular area is going to be highly prone to floods, a little bit increased risk of storms, Oklahoma, welcome, heat risk, fire risk, and of course, very low drought risk. You know, it almost seems like these two are part and parcel. If one's high, the other one's not, that kind of thing. Anyway, again, another system that's got plenty of details on exactly how they're coming up with these numbers. So if you guys want to learn more about it, you can click there. Good news is that this isn't actually a part of the reports. So like the AARP livability index would actually have to be removed from the reports. The climate check thing is just a completely separate system. You'd actually have to request a report to be sent out. But that's enough of that. Let's actually take our 10-minute break. And when we come back, we'll talk about working with a seller. I'm going to put the music back on and we will put the slideshow back on. As soon as we're done with the break, I'm going to have everybody hit that raise hand button. So make sure that you guys are back here at 10:17. Welcome back, everybody. It is 10:17. All right. If I could get everybody to hit that raise hand button on your screen. Again, we just use this to make sure that everybody's back and presently watching the video. OREC has been excessively gracious with us to allow us to continue doing the webinars the way that we have. In an effort to at least continue doing this, we've just had to kind of work around some of the other rules that they have regarding this. I think I only have one person that still needs to hit the raise hand button, Janet, or if you wouldn't mind, hit raise hand at the bottom of your screen just so I know that you're still here. And then we can go ahead and get started again. But I think I saw everybody else hit that raise hand button. So Jan, if you wouldn't mind, and then we'll be good to go. I'm going to wait just a little longer, but let's go ahead and hop back into it at least. So now that we've been looking at a property that we ended up finding for a seller or buyer, excuse me, let's briefly talk about the reports that we can create, and then we'll go ahead and dive into working with a seller instead. So if I do find that this particular property is of interest to my buyer, up at the top right corner, there's a Create Report button. And when you first click on that, it's actually just going to select the Property Report option right away. And this Property Report option has a View Sample button and a little plus icon to the right. Now, the other reports will similarly have the same options where you can see what they kind of look like, as well as actually find any of the additional options underneath there. This is where we're going to be able to find certain portions of the report that we may not want to show. So for instance, if we wanted to see the estimated value of a property, we can choose whether or not that's actually going to be suppressed or not. We also have the option to remove, again, that AARP livability index. So again, if it's not a particularly great piece of information for my client to have to see, especially on the buyer's end, we can just uncheck that checkbox. Just so you guys are aware, the neighborhood information can oftentimes be some really valuable information, but it may end up bloating some of your reports. So if there's things that you guys wanted to trim down, you can actually remove the school information, the neighborhood information. And that's actually going to take this roughly 20 or 30 pages worth of information down to maybe 15 to 25. So it always depends on what information is going to be available for each property in each neighborhood, et cetera. But if you guys needed to trim the fat on some report you've created, that's an easy way to do so. There's a seller's report, which we're going to see in a minute here, as well as the valuation workbook. But I also wanted to point out the property flyer. So for instance, if we do end up in a situation where we're going to be doing an open house for this property, or kind of just wanted to give somebody a brief overview of it, what we can do is actually just print off a one sheet. And what this looks like is actually over here on the right. We've got a little preview of it. It shows that there's going to be a map, whatever photo it is that I select here, the basic details about the property, and then the public remarks for the property mixed in with the contact information for you down at the bottom. So this could be something that you may just want to create for yourself, print out a few dozen copies of them, and then bring them to an open house that you're hosting. Or if you guys have a client that was looking through some properties and just kind of wanted a brief overview of each of them, you can just grab these one sheets and send them off to the client just to kind of help them. The next option down is actually going to be our mini property report. I'm actually a little bit more partial to this one than the regular property report, just because it's a little bit shorter, a little bit more targeted to just the property itself. Notice even here, they got rid of all of the other neighborhood statistic options and instead just focused into the housing stats and charts. So for instance, if you do have that buyer that's maybe an investor of some kind, this mini property report might be a little bit too little information. The property report might be a better option. But if you guys have somebody that's just kind of doing their cursory look at a whole bunch of different properties, and they just need to have a little collection of information for each of them, you can just do this mini property report. And again, check or uncheck any of the options that you want or don't want, send it on its way. The valuation workbook is actually going to be effectively the same thing as the seller's report. It's just this one's going to be a little bit more expansive on some of the minutia. So the broad strokes that the seller's report tries to show are going to be whittled down into extremely fine detail with the valuation workbook. This is something that I don't think too many of you guys might be using, but it's all going to depend on your level of expertise. If you have a lot of experience with doing assessments or appraisals for properties, that valuation workbook might be something you'll be seeing a lot of. But there are some differences between that and the seller's report. We'll look at those a little bit more later. We also have the market activity, neighborhood, and school options. Now, interestingly enough, they do have the market activity and neighborhood options for, oops, clicking all the wrong buttons there, for specifically the neighborhood or the area that this particular property is located in. It's worth pointing out that what that's going to do is actually just break down into the zip code. Notice even when I ended up switching from, let's do the mini property report, it's got the full address. As soon as I switch down to the neighborhood or market activity, it's going to just be showing that zip code. So these reports are more generalized information, but they do have valuable details, especially if you guys are working with, again, somebody like an investor or somebody who's never lived in that neighborhood. They may end up wanting to know more about the market or more about the demographics of the neighborhood, so on and so forth. I think neighborhoods actually include something that a lot of people might be interested in. The quality of life stats and charts is going to show you guys annual precipitation, days of sunshine, the temperatures, the average temperatures on a year by year or quarter by quarter basis. So like what's the temperatures like in January and April and June and October, so that you kind of get a feel for what the seasons are like in the area. And then finally, the school option, as soon as I select this, it's actually going to ask me which school I'm wanting to create this report for. One of the big things I wanted to point out with the school information is that there is an option for reviews. It's important to note that the reviews are just uncurated. So what that means is that you guys can actually have students that have done a review of a school, and that student's review might not be what you're hoping for. They can be very candid. I've read some really rough reviews of bad teachers here that, I don't know, if I were looking for a new property, I want to have to worry about my kid going to a school with that teacher, but you know, it's all going to depend. Choosing to include those or not might be a decision you have to make after looking at it. You find out what that review is actually going to say, if it's good stuff, if it's worthwhile information, or if it's just accurate. You guys just want people to have a good understanding of what's going on. You can choose to include that or not. You can also break this down by the nearby schools as well, so you can see some other stuff nearby. But I'm going to leave mine on the basic property report. I've already made my customizations. I took off the livability index. I think I'm set. So I'm going to move down to the next field where we can personalize this. We put in the name, put in some extra, spiel about, hey, so-and-so, this is such and such. We're doing this and that. And then down here at the bottom, we can choose either to email it, or we can actually just go directly into the PDF, which is what we'll choose to do now. So I'm going to hit Run Report down here at the bottom. Again, using pretty much just the basic options for the property report. And after we've clicked that button, there's going to be a little icon up here at the top indicating that we have a report that's being generated. At the very top of the page, it's also going to show the most recent reports that I've created as well. And then we also get to choose which of the reports we're actually trying to look at. It keeps all of your reports for a while. In fact, if you guys notice, it actually has a report that I created almost a full month ago at this point. So if I needed to jump back into that, I can download it, delete it, even post it to my Facebook, or even rerun the report. So if I wanted to get fresh data, I can do that again. Or I can even find out whether or not this particular report got viewed. So for instance, if I do end up emailing this off to a client and I want to find out whether or not they saw it or not, I can view it there. Once this report is actually finalized, there's going to be a little ding dong sound, a little doorbell noise. You can turn that off. Speaking of which, You can turn that noise off. So in case that was way too loud for you guys, I apologize. But there is a little off switch. So that the next time you guys create a report, you don't have to deal with, the obnoxious noise that comes with it. Once it's done, again, we can select that report from the property report here, or I can just go up to the top here, download report. Or once it actually finished, there was that doorbell noise, and there was actually a download button there as well. So this is what a report will basically look like. Again, remember at the very beginning of class, I told you guys to make sure that all of your contact information is up to date, because by the time you guys are creating reports, you don't get to polish it up. It's just going to grab whatever was there on your profile and send it off to the printer. A little further down, we have some basic details about the house. We can choose to not include this estimate in case you guys don't want to muddy the water with what the value of the house might be. Basic details about the house. We've got a satellite imagery north to south. We've got some information about what schools, photos for the listing, et cetera, et cetera. So lots of details on here, including some history of the property, what the estimated values are in the area. Looks like this is in a little bit lower value area. Meanwhile, there's some higher value areas nearby. What the estimated value change is, value per square foot, if it's in a flood zone or not. So lots of details that the client would actually really need to know. If you guys do end up wanting to kind of just learn more about this, what I would suggest doing is actually just run a report for a property that you guys currently have. So if you guys are currently working with a property, or even if you just want to see what it does on your own property, like your house, just run that report, find out what it can do for you. Again, see if there's something that might be worthwhile in there, or if there are some parts and pieces that you just don't want to include. So let's now move back. I'm going to head back to my homepage. In this last half hour, we're actually going to spend talking about working with a seller instead. Now, the good news on working with a seller is that pretty much can use all the same exact functions that we just did, except instead of finding a property with some, overarching search, we can actually just dive directly into a specific address. So in this case, I've already searched for this recently, so I'm just going to click on it, but you can just type in the address up at the top there as well. If this is somebody that I'm working with, and I'm actually going to be kind of coming back to this over and over again for the details, it might be wise for me to save this, and that way I can just give it a name, save my changes, and then when I come back into RPR later, I can just dive right back into this using my saved properties. But this is an off-market property. And what that means is that I'm actually going to be seeing no listed information here, no listing agent information over here to the right. It just goes straight into the evaluate climate check options. And we've also got some notes in the property facts section here. Now, as we start making changes to the details about the property, we're going to notice that this refined value may end up changing. We're going to talk specifically about the refined value as well as creating a CMA later. But I wanted to mention something before we get into any of the pricing and all of the details about the property itself. Occasionally, people will get a little bit confused as to what the valuation model is. The automatic valuation model, or automated valuation model, or what's referred to most frequently as just simply an AVM, is actually going to be using public record information to be able to give you guys a rough estimate of what the value of the property should be if it was only basing its information on the property that's sold and has been recorded in the tax record. What this RVM is actually doing is not only taking all of the public record information, but then it's also combining that information with the details on listing data in that area. So rather than limiting yourself to just what's sold, this is also going to be including details about the properties that are currently for sale, properties that are pending, and properties that have sold in the MLS but not have shown up yet on the tax record. Now, again, the RVM and the AVM will still provide you, no matter which one it is, with a confidence score. Now, the confidence score, the higher it is, the more likely it is that it's going to sell within that price or that price range. The higher the confidence score is, the more narrow the range is going to be as well. So in this case, as I'm seeing this here, I have a 4-star confidence score, which means that we didn't quite have as much information as we might need, but it's still pretty confident that it's going to be somewhere between 292 and 379. We were just looking at a property before that just, again, I didn't choose that example. It just happened to be a property that was really good, where the frame for that range was, I mean, barely over $10,000 for a property that's roughly $20,000. Now, what that means is that in this case, that extra 1 star of confidence score narrowed the range dramatically. Because right now, what we're looking at here is effectively a $90,000 difference for a property that's worth, not too many intervals of that. So it's going to expand pretty dramatically based on how much information is available in that area. So if you guys do end up noticing something that's just way off, double check what the RVM or AVM confidence score is and double check that range as well. Because more likely than not, it could be within the range. It's just at the bottom or the top of it. Now, a little further down, we have our property facts. Now, since this is a property that is not currently listed or hasn't been listed recently, I'm actually only going to see the public facts. This is only going to show me what information has actually been entered by the tax record information. So again, since this is in Tulsa County, I got a small problem, no bedroom count. So I need to actually add in the bedroom count. And let's say that this 3 total baths is actually correct, but it's actually not 3 total full baths. It's actually 2 full baths and 1 partial bath. Maybe the living square footage was also off. Maybe they'd expanded the house just a little bit. Ooh, not that much. There we go. And then we can hit save. And it's going to keep those details effectively as a notepad for me so that when I finally get to the point that I'm going to be putting a listing into the system, I can actually see my notes and go, oh, that's right. Yeah, obviously the tax record doesn't have this correct. I need to actually update that, et cetera, et cetera. Now, there is an extra option down here at the bottom to add other rows of details. So if you guys needed to, you can actually start citing other options or even just starting your own collection of custom facts. There's even a edit custom facts option down here. So if this stuff isn't providing you what you need, you can actually add those in there and make sure that the next time you get in, you can start monitoring that information. I also wanted to point out this notes section one more time. So before, when we were looking at the previous listing for a buyer, this isn't really going to serve that much of a purpose. But when we're working with sellers, this could be incredibly valuable. Again, this is all going to be accessible from the app on your phone. And there's also going to be a voice recording option on your phone. So you can just pull up the property on your phone, hit that record button on the notes, and you can just record your conversation with this seller instead of having to kind of keep furiously typed notes on a tiny screen. You can just get it all recorded instead. Now, there's also a section on here for photos. You can manually add those from the computer, but again, if you're on the app, you can actually take the photos with the app. So if you guys needed to just get a couple photos so that whenever you put the listing in, and an hour after you guys get the listing agreement signed or whatever, you guys can actually just grab those photos from the photo tab here. There's also a section here for seller's proceeds. You can hit that add proceeds button. But all of this boils down to just making sure that I have all the information that I need in order to make sure that this listing goes live with everything that it would need to have on it. Now, since we've gotten this saved, I'm going to be able to jump back to this. I did want to recap that real quick. So again, I get back to the office. I'm needing to make sure that I've got all my information up to date for this new listing I'm going to be listing. I'm going to scroll down here and click on view. And I can see that property that I just saved right up here at the top. Dive back into it, and I can make my changes, add my notes, review the transcription, whatever it is. Now, let's talk now about the value of this property. Let me make one quick detour to get this all changed. Okay, the rest of that was already on there. All right. So when we first got onto this property, it provided us with just an RVM. When you get to a brand new property that you guys haven't worked with before, there's going to be a section here for refined value and CMA value. The refined value is actually going to take whatever the automated estimate was and allow us to modify it further. So this is actually allowing us to take the algorithm that produced this particular number with this particular confidence and say, hey, by the way, there's a couple details that we actually needed to change. What is that going to do to the price? Now, this is going to rely a lot on the algorithm that they have. So there are some people that are hesitant to use this. I don't blame them. There is also always going to be the option for the CMA value. So this refine value option is only going to be available if they've already provided an estimate. No matter whether it has an estimate or not, you guys can still create the CMA. We'll talk about how to do the CMA after we get done with this refine value option. So up here at the top, we've got a refined value button, and we've also got the refined value next to the estimate that it provides. So once we click on that, it's going to pull up a basic screen verifying the information that we have. So again, I needed to make sure that it said 3 bedrooms. I needed to make sure that it's got 2 full and 1 partial. Since I hit that reset button, I erased the work that I had already made, so that's my mistake. But whenever I hit apply, you'll notice that this actually goes back to the information that we have on this page. So it's already been returned here. But when we go back to the refined value, again, this is going to allow us to see what the value is based on the details that are entered here. Because I took away a full bath and switched it over to a partial bath, that actually removed $4,620. So its estimate was off by that much because I took away full bath and switched it to a partial. If I actually took that partial away, put it at 0, it's going to remove even further. If I switch this back to, let's say 4 full baths instead, it's actually going to add value to the property. So you can kind of see what the value is for each of these. So if I do 2, 1, apply, I've only got a decrease so far. If I start making adjustments to my living area, so I switch this over to 27, it's going to add value again. If I remove that, it's going to decrease it. Now, what the exact value is for each partial bath and full bath and extra square footage and removal of square footage, all of that is going to be dependent on the market in the area and what properties are currently for sale or have currently sold. So the algorithm itself isn't exactly made explicit, but I usually recommend people, if you guys are curious, just make some changes to things, hit apply, and see what it does. Now, some that are going to be also requiring a little bit of an algorithm is going to be this refined value option. This is going to be the home improvements that you guys can add. This could be crucial for a client that has a bunch of money that they've invested in the property. So what I can do is actually say, okay, so you did a kitchen remodel. It's like it was a mid-range kitchen remodel. You guys use this as your kind of quarantine project back in 2020. You guys ended up spending $15,000 on that kitchen remodel, and I'm going to hit add. Well, when it ended up adding that value, it depreciated it substantially. In this case, actually more than half, even though that's almost exactly 2 years away. So what this is indicating to us is that this extra value that they added has in fact depreciated, and we have an estimate of exactly how much that's depreciated. This is including inflation and how much it depreciates the moment you guys put any of the equipment into the house, or in some cases purchase the equipment. But whatever the case is, this amount that they added is not actually going to add a substantial portion of value to the property. On the other hand, if you guys end up in a situation where you have a client that's got some needs that the property has, so the property is not going to be popular unless you make a change to, let's say, the fence repairs, and you know that the fence repairs are going to cost $15,000. Might be high for a fence. Anyway, when we actually add in any needed improvements, make sure that you guys have a specific estimate in mind. Now, the reason we're mentioning that is because if you guys noticed, this immediately just removed that value, just straight up deduction. No algorithm in place, no depreciation of value, just this is how much it's going to cost for the buyer to fix the problem that that house has. So we're going to just deduct that from the value of the house, so that the client that buys it will have the opportunity to have that extra bandwidth to do the repairs that you're unwilling to do. So if you guys end up mentioning that to people, you can put that information onto the report that you create for this. And that way they can see, look, get this stuff done now, and it's not going to end up costing you in the long run. Or don't do it now, and we'll just have to decrease the value. Now, the last section on here is going to be a little bit more subjective. I'm going to zoom us out just a little bit. So this is going to be refined value by market and home conditions. Notice this is all sliders. We got local market conditions, slow, average, hot. We got the home interior and exterior conditions are going to be inferior, equal, or superior. Same thing with lot size, view, and privacy. It's just going to be effectively a slider that's, I mean, for all intents and purposes, just subjective. So what we might notice is in situations like this, people should aim for a certain value that they're wanting to increase or decrease the property by. So for instance, if I know that this property is actually only worth like 290, maybe 300 at most, so I have to actually remove about $23,000. What I can do is come down here to the bottom and say, look, the market conditions in this area are hot. I might as well admit that to my client. That adds an extra $3,663 apparently, just by sliding this slider around. But I also needed to mention to them, yeah, it might look nice on the outside, but it's not really that good on the inside. The lot size is about equal with everybody else, but there's a Dollar Tree across the street. That's going to take a pretty significant amount of money off. And of course, because there's a Dollar Tree across the street, that value isn't really going to be, or the privacy isn't really going to be as nice. So now I can kind of keep moving these around until I find a nice balance between what I'm hoping to find. And it looks like right here, I got 23,000 deducted. If you do end up using this refined value, and it's the subjective sliders, which they are what they are, if you make sure that you've gotten this all positioned to where you want it to be, you may end up having to explain this to your client as to why you refined the value in such a way that caused it to go down below $30,000. Why is it that you think that the market is hot and the exterior of the house is nice, but the interior is not? Why do you think the view is not great and the privacy is not great? You're going to have to go back and tell your client why you did that. So this subjective stuff is helpful, but again, try and aim for a specific number. Otherwise, what you guys can do is if you just want cold, hard facts, and that's it, that's when we switch over to this CMA option. Now, again, the refine value option is a button up at the top and a button right here, but the create CMA option is the exact same thing. Now, when you start up a CMA, it's going to give you the option between a comparative analysis, which is the basic option that I recommend for everybody. And then you also have a sales comparison analysis, which is going to allow us to get into a little bit more nitty-gritty details. Now, if you need to get a little bit of clarification on this as to which one is going to be the better option for you, there is a what's the difference button. But I did want to point out this sales comparison analysis will allow you guys to put in specific values for each and every element of the property that you guys can mark. So for instance, if you do end up having a house that has, one less bedroom than every other property in the entire subdivision, I can actually make sure that each and every extra bedroom has a deduction of the value of a specific number that I know. If that sounds cumbersome or a little bit difficult to try and gather all the information on, or if you guys just don't have the expertise to provide that level of detail, the comparative analysis is by far the best option. It's also the most approachable. So let's talk about how this works. You notice there's only 5 steps to this. We've got confirm home facts. This is going to be us making sure that all the details about the property are up to date and accurate. Thankfully, I've already defined some of that information, so it's actually already good to go. But once I confirm my home facts and close, it brings me now to the search for comps. This is going to give me the option to find any of the comparable properties in the vicinity. Now, I wanted to point something interesting out about this. When we are using this, we have the option to add in any properties that you already know about. So if you guys had run a CMA in Matrix and you just had a bunch of listings that you wanted to use, you can do that. Or you can use this search function. It automatically chooses your property type, should automatically have active, pending, and closed. And then it's going to use this exact area. So literally wherever it is on the map that I've zoomed into, that's going to be where it runs its search. So if you guys wanted to narrow it down to just this portion down here, or if you guys wanted to allow it to include some of the properties north of the Highway 44, all of that's up to you. Just move it into position where you want it to search, and that's where it's going to search. You do have the option to add in some shapes or even use the custom area that you guys have, or even just use geography for that particular area. But I usually recommend people just use the map or the shapes. Now, it also does provide us the option to choose how recently it was on the market. This allows you to go all the way up to 18 months. But for those of you guys who have been through our CMAs and Matrix course, you guys might remember we don't think that anything over a year should be used to do a pricing estimate. And even a year is being relatively generous. Oftentimes 6 months back is pretty much the extent that you should go back. But if you guys work in a rural area or in an area where the market isn't quite as busy, that 6 months might not give you everything that you need. So you can go back to a year. But again, a year and a half is just way too far back. For those of you guys who've been doing this for even just a couple of years, you might notice that there's been a pretty dramatic change in values, even just in the last 6 months, let alone the last year, let alone the last year and a half. Now, below that, we do have some options to add in if we wanted to have a bedroom count or bathroom count. It starts us off with some basic details here. And then we can choose whether or not we want to include the lot size as well, in case that's actually an important element of this particular property. But now that I've got everything put in here, I'm going to hit search. And this is going to provide me all of the properties that are currently in a sold status, or properties that are currently for sale, or in other words, pending in some way. Now, as we're going through this, I can choose which of these properties I want to include. And occasionally you might end up noticing that there's actually some that say used in RVM. And what this is indicating is that this particular property was actually so similar to the property that I'm looking at that it actually decided that this is going to be something that I'm going to use within the RVM. So when I check the checkbox for that one, you'll actually see that pop up here with that notification. Now, depending on what you guys originally searched for, and especially if you guys didn't have to make any changes to the bedroom count, bathroom count, et cetera, you're going to notice a lot of these have that little star, meaning that whatever you found is probably pretty decent data. Even the system thinks so. Now, once you've gotten everything chosen, you can choose which ones you want or don't want. You can remove those from the list as well. And then we can just do update valuation and close. So it's a fairly simple process. So in this case, we found a bunch of comps. We're going to make some adjustments to the comps next. We can say, all right, this one looks like it's a little bit better than my property. This one's actually not significantly worse, but enough that its value is actually a little too low for my needs. And as you guys are going through and adjusting these, you can actually see the comps are going to start changing. So here's our base, and here's what the adjusted result is actually showing me. So if I say that this property that's, a lower price is actually a little bit better, it's going to start decreasing my adjusted result. If I say that this one's worse, I can actually see that increase my value. So again, try to aim for a specific number and then just use these sliders to try and indicate that. There's also going to be the next and previous, so you guys can see all of them. Make sure that you make your adjustments, and then that way you guys can get exactly the result that you're hoping for. Perfect. All right, I'm happy with that. I'm going to go over here to the side, and yeah, I think that should be set. All right, down here to the very bottom, I can add some notes if I need to, include those in my reports if I need to add those notes, and then also want to indicate like this one is better than your place because it is, or whatever you needed to say. And you can choose whether or not to include that. So update valuation and close. And it brings me back here to where I can see my final result. So here's the comps that I found. I can change those if I needed to kind of give that a little bit more of an average look. But the result of my comp analysis is the most important thing. This is going to be the client-facing thing. Notice it says this will appear on your seller's report. I'm going to say I want this to be flat 3,000 or 300,000. At minimum, I'm going to say 275. And at maximum, I'm going to say 325. Perfect. So hit save and then create report. Here we go. So the automatic choice here when we hit create report brings us to our seller's report. Once more, we do have the option to choose which parts and pieces of the report I want to include. I want to make a big note about this one. When you guys are creating a seller's report, the majority of the properties that are going to be shown on there are going to be things that are just in the vicinity. So that's all going to be under this section that says market activity. If you want to keep your reports, your seller's reports short, uncheck those checkboxes. Or if you guys want to leave those on, you guys can actually choose to limit the properties down to maybe just 4 properties instead. So that way you're not seeing all of the listings in the area. You're just seeing a select few. All right, so let's hit that run report. And once this is done, that'll show me my report. And then it'll also have that little ding sound that lets me know that it's completed it. All right, let me make sure. Talked about everything we needed. Yeah, we should be set. All right. Yeah, we should be good. So I'm going to head up to the learn option. No, it's under help. That's right, training area. All right. So the last thing I wanted to mention to you guys was just the RPR mobile. While my system is still producing this report, wanted to show you guys, we do have 2 different webinars that are available through RPR specifically. So not something that we're presenting. I do have a mobile agent class later this afternoon, and then an in-person one tomorrow morning. But if you guys want to learn about the app itself, I can't stress enough how valuable that webinar can be. Both of these are useful. I would suggest at least starting off with the RPR Works Everywhere Just Like You one, just because it's great. They have pre-recorded versions of these. It's just an hour long. You guys can watch it in real time, or you can attend it and then view it later. So watch now, or set up a specific time that you'll be viewing it. But either way, strongly recommend that you guys use the app. The app is invaluable. I really think that it's one of the more useful tools that you guys have access to. I feel like I must have moved too quickly through a certain area, and I'm trying to find out why we're a little ahead of schedule. I think skipping over the history and charts tab really trimmed down on our discussion, but honestly, it's not a lot of information I feel like people are usually using. We'll circle back around to that actually. Anyway, here's our report for the seller's report. And again, it starts us off with some basic details about the property and myself. And then it starts us immediately into the current estimated value. So here's the estimated value according to the system. And then within the bottom of that range is my refined value. So I made some adjustments. Here's the Dollar Tree that's right next door. Not really, just as a heads up. And then here's my comp analysis showing what I would recommend for the price of the property. It shows any of the changes that I made highlighted in blue. Got some extended home facts, the AARP livability index. Notice this one's a little bit better than that one that we were looking at in Bixby. Here's our refined market conditions, some value changes. Again, if you're having any of those changed, get ready to have to explain why you changed those to your client. Some of the history information on here, just as a heads up, is going to show what the median estimated value is. As you guys can see, 2020 hit, boom, huge explosion in value on a lot of properties, especially for a property like this. It looks like Oklahoma in and of itself has actually experienced a pretty significant upturn in the value over the last few years. Always double check what your legend is, just in case you guys haven't been noticing. There's a lot of information that's being spewed out onto the internet that's misinformation. Double check what your legends are. Double check what the source of the information is. If you guys notice, here's our data source, how frequently it's updated. Always check sources. We also have the sales and financing activity. This is another section from our history section. It'll show whenever the property has had its value assessed. Looks like had a pretty large bump in the assessment there. Market activity, some details about the market. These are all under the charts section as well. And then finally, we get to our comps map. Now, the comps map is actually showing us, in this case, where all of the dots are. So here's our subject property, and here's some of the properties that I found nearby. When I scroll down further, it's also going to show a side-by-side comparison. Here's my property that I'm working with, and then here's each of the properties next to it. If I do end up making any adjustments to this, it's worth pointing out that that stuff is not going to be included unless you choose to include that. So further down, we also see some of the comparable properties listed on a page by page. So this, in my opinion, is actually one of the more useful things because I'm a very visual person. I might have gone to this person's house. I might have seen this every time I drive by, and then coming to find out that that's actually how much it's worth could be a little bit of a shock. But if I just see the address, I might not have that point of relation to know what the discussion is actually referring to. Meanwhile, this one actually looks like it's worth that amount of money. Anyway, the value of good photography, just saying. Yep. Oh, here's the recent market activity. I mentioned earlier that this is actually a really good omission. If you guys don't want to just artificially bloat your reports, we are currently on page 24 of 52. This is a short version of the seller's report to begin with. But notice how many pages and pages of market activity is being noted here. And this is not stuff that I manually chose either. This is literally just finding properties in the vicinity that are considered, you know, at least passably close to the property in question. And of course, get all the way down to the very bottom here. And on page 50, we finally get back to stuff that's more specifically related to what I've done. So just bear that in mind. That market activity information can double the amount of space that your report will take up. All right. Well, that's it for today's class. Just as a reminder, if you guys do end up having any problems or questions, you can use this learn function. And there's also a 24/7 phone number and a live chat, which again, I really love the live chat. They're a great group, very responsive. And if you guys notice any bad data in there, just email that on to support@NPR or NARRPR.com. All right. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. If I could get everybody to hit that raise hand button, give me a little wave on your way out. Just want to see that everybody's still here. And I will see you guys later. Stay safe, enjoy this rainy weather before we get back to whatever miserable heat will be right around the corner again. But have a good one, guys. Thank you for joining us today. And if you have any problems or questions, you can always reach out to us first. There's always that help group that's available if you need them. And I think if you guys don't mind, hit that raise hand button and then just leave it up. I just want to make sure that I see who all's still here. Jan, I think Casey, if you're still there, hit that raise hand button. And Linda, I think I saw that your hand went up, but if you wouldn't mind hitting it one more time. Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. All right. Yeah. So other than Jan and Casey, the rest of you guys can leave. I appreciate you guys working with me on this. All of this, again, is just to make sure that we don't have to have the video cameras up the entire time. But yeah, Casey, Casey Newton, if you can hear me, hit that raise hand button. I just want to make sure that you guys are still present. Otherwise, I won't be able to give you CE credit. All right. Have a good one, guys. Again, stay safe. I'm going to go ahead and close up shop. Jan and Casey, if you guys can hear me, but you're not able to get that raise hand button hit, please give us a call. But it looks like I won't be able to give you guys the CE credit. Have a good one, though. Bye.